Hello legends. In this video, we're going to be building out a chat with PDF web app. Now, I'm getting a lot of interest for this in my AI agency, and I thought I would build this out. I actually posted a video recently where I closed a YouTube client asking me to build this solution out for them. So you can go ahead and watch that. I'll link it here. But the primary use case is businesses have a lot of internal knowledge resources. They'll have policies, processes. They might have additional product or service information that they don't want to make public, or a bunch of different information that employees have to access. Now, the biggest struggle is making this information usable and searchable by internal team members. And with the rise of AI, a lot of business owners essentially want to create a chat with internal documents web app so that they can improve the usability of their documentation. So this is an example of what I'm talking about. So as you can see, this is a web page, and this is built on Replit, and I'll explain more later on. But this first page is actually a Voiceflow chatbot embedded into this page, and now you can actually chat with this. The second link here, if you click it open, it's the file manager. Now the value is that you as a business owner or a team leader or someone that's not super techie doesn't have to go into any back-end tool, doesn't have to know how to make API calls. You can just click this button and then add more PDFs into this chat application because it's linked up to this assistant over here. So whatever PDFs you upload are directly chattable instantaneously with the assistant. And then you can also list the files that you have added here. And let's say you want to delete one of the files. Once again, you just click it and then you can delete it, or choose to just leave it in here. And finally, I've got a tab here for instructions, but this is just to demonstrate that you could have one for your customer support team, which is uploaded all the information about your support processes or support knowledge resources. You might even have another link for your sales team, so they have all of your objection handling and sales information loaded up into a chat assistant. And you might even have another one for feedback. So you might deploy this web app as a solution for your internal team to not only access the information, but also provide feedback either on their experiences working in a company, or even what kind of content might be missing or things they'd like to see different. So deploying as a web app is actually super versatile. And for this video, we'll just be focusing on making a chat with PDF app just to get the ball rolling. But as you can see, there's a bunch of different ways that you can actually build this out. So some of the features of building it out as a web app are: number one, you can chat with uploaded documents instantly. So it's a super simple UI that anyone can use. And you can also dynamically add and remove files. So just once again, you can just press these buttons. You don't have to be techie. You can just press this and upload a file or delete a file. And then you can click this chat with assistant button and instantly chat with the documents. There's no downtime. Now, the other value of deploying this as an app, like a web app, and we're going to be using Replit once again, I'll get to this later. But the value is that, number one, now you can already deploy it as a standalone web page. So you can just make this web page live and give it to your team to access. But since you have this web page, you can actually target this URL in a bunch of your other tools that you're already using for your team. So one of the difficult things with deploying this kind of application using Voiceflow is you have to have a web page to serve this on, right? And I know a lot of businesses have internal web pages that they use. They've kind of got tools that they're using, and those tools don't really give you access to code. You can't really go into ClickUp or Zendesk and modify the HTML of the actual application itself. You can't do that. And as you can see here, Voiceflow needs some kind of HTML embed to show up on a screen. So then the reason that we're deploying it as an app is that within Zendesk, when you build an app, or Freshdesk, or ClickUp, or Microsoft Teams, whenever you build any of these apps, you can then point to this URL, and then whatever we see here on this screen, so this entire screen here with these three buttons and this interface here, like everything that I'm doing now will just display within Zendesk or within ClickUp, within Microsoft Teams, within whatever tool you're using for your team already. And that's because we've deployed it as a standalone web app on Replit. So you can see the value is starting to build up here. So not only do we have a very nice, simple user interface where anyone can actually upload and remove files and then chat with them instantly, but we also have a way to deploy this in a bunch of different areas and using common tools that a lot of businesses already are using. And to speak about some other use cases, you probably already have a bunch of ideas on how to deploy this, but let's say, for example, you're a new employee onboarding. You have so many documents and resources that it's too hard to just train someone in a 2-week window on all your material. Realistically, people learn through experience and through practice. So you can give this to your new employees and say, whenever you run into a speed bump, access this tool and then ask it a question. And then they can just keep going and remove the training wheels as they need to. So it's really good for new employee onboarding or even existing employees. Like I mentioned before, if you're in a sales team, you can upload all the objection handling into one of these chat assistants, and then your salesperson can just use the chat assistant live on the call. Next, you can have for client support. So like I mentioned before, I built this out for a legal consulting firm who was going to give these out to their own clients because they also have relatively complicated documentation. It's, legal compliance matters. So to make it easier for their own clients to access and use the information, they're going to build these chat with PDF apps and give them out to their clients to improve their own service. And over here, I've actually got a slightly outside of the box use case, which I'm using for my own team. But this isn't going to be one of those embed situations, but I've used the backend engine, so the search functionality of how to interact with my documents and get highly accurate answers. I've actually deployed this on my support page. So now instead of people having to manually search through my articles, they can interact with the AI search bar and then just type in their question. And actually, I'm finding a lot of people are just typing in like 1 or 2 words, and then the AI is able to pick up the context of those 2 words and just produce a highly rich response back to the customer. I'm actually noticing that's happening in my own knowledge base for my e-commerce store, where people are just putting in a couple of words. So regular article searching is kind of getting a little bit iffy right now. But yes, you can actually build out something like this for your own support page by using the back end of this tool. So it's all going to be a little bit clearer later on, but to keep going through this. And finally, the tools that we're going to be using. So we'll be using Pinecone Assistant API for our database and RAG. So the Pinecone Assistant API is kind of like the OpenAI Assistant API in that with one API call, we can actually upload our PDFs, and Pinecone does all the backend processing of those documents to add them to a vector database to make them AI searchable. And then we have another API call where we can now search that AI database, again, using plain English text. It takes that plain English text, converts it into a vector, and then it plugs it into the database and retrieves the most accurate responses. So the Pinecone API, which I've made a few videos about this already, and I'll link them here. It is so awesome and so easy to work with and highly, highly accurate. So we're using this because we don't want any hallucination. We just want to return high quality information based on our own knowledge resources. Then we'll be using Voiceflow for the chat UI because Voiceflow is actually so nice and so clean. And if you're new to Voiceflow, you can actually run a free account as well. You don't have to have a paid account to use this. And then finally, we'll be using Replit to actually deploy the web app. So I'm going to show you how to build it on Replit. We'll be using their AI to do a lot of the coding for us. And then I'll show you exactly how to deploy this. So you're going to have a live link that you can either give to your team to access on a web page, or you can plug it into Zendesk or ClickUp or Microsoft Teams, wherever you want. So before we get into this, I want to explain some of the API calls we'll be making. And this is probably the most technical stuff that we'll need to know for this. Aside from the actual coding, where in Replit we'll be coding out the web app using the Replit AI. But this is probably going to be, the max of what we really need to pay attention to. So if you go into the documentation and click on the Assistance API, there's a bunch of different API endpoints here. Now, what we're going to be using is this upload file to assistant endpoint. We're going to be sending our PDF directly to this endpoint, and it's going to add it to the assistance database straight away. And then when we want to delete files, we can just use this list files endpoint, which is here, and we'll get a list of files returned to us, which we can then use to delete an uploaded file. So we just use this, and we append the file name to the API call, and we can delete that file as well. And that's how we're going to get this functionality here to add files and to list and then delete files. And finally, when we want to chat with the actual PDFs we've got uploaded, we're going to use this endpoint here, which is chat with an assistant. And this is the endpoint here. Now to speak about this endpoint a little bit more, this is the API call. This is how it's going to look. And as you can see here, the body of the API call is going to contain a messages array. So these square brackets are an array, and inside the array, we have the user role and then the message the user is sending. Now, this is a pretty static API call because it only lets us send one message to a specific endpoint. And unlike the OpenAI Assistance API, there's no thread here. There's no actual way to maintain a conversation because this is like me going to you each day with just one sentence, but we can't continue the conversation. So we do get a response from this API call, but if we scroll down, I'm going to show you exactly how to embed memory into the API call you make. So you can have a continuous conversation that has reference of context, like prior messages that were sent. And here we have an example of how to provide conversation history in a chat request. So as we saw before, we had the first message, and again, this is the array, so it's the square brackets, but we have the first message object, the response from the assistant, now it's role assistant with the response. And then we have our next question, which kind of includes the context of this in the actual API call. So this is going to be crucial for us to maintain ongoing conversations and have that really nice natural experience for our chat application. Now, as you can see, this might be a little bit difficult for us to code out, but I've already built this out for a couple of different videos that I've made. And I've got a GitHub repo where I have this code where we just need to plug it into Voiceflow, and then our Voiceflow conversation already has memory. So we're lucky in that sense that I've already got that code built out that you can now copy and paste into your Voiceflow and have conversation history in your API calls. So this is that function over here. I'm going to link this repo as well in the description of this video, but as you can see, you just scroll down to here and you can just copy this entire code and then paste it into a Voiceflow function. Okay, so now let's transition into building this out. I'm going to be using Replit. If you haven't used Replit before, you can just go to replit.com, which is this URL here, and create an account. You can use a free account for this, I'm pretty sure, but if you need to pay, you can go on a $20 a month plan, and yeah, that'll get you a long way. So I'm gonna click Create REPL, and we're gonna be building this out in Node.js. Now we're gonna be using Node.js because this is gonna let us actually deploy this as a web app. So I'm gonna click Node.js, and I'm just gonna say test app, but you should name this something a little bit more specific for yourself. So I'm gonna go ahead and create the REPL. Okay, so now what we've just created is a template app. So there's a bunch of different files here, some files here. We haven't created any of these, but they come pre-packaged when you create a Node app. Now, if I click run, let's just see what happens. So I'm gonna click run, and technically nothing is happening because even though we have a placeholder app, in our main app file, which is here, this index.js, there's nothing written down here. That's why our console log, so if you're familiar with coding, this is where all the logs should be of like what's happening when we're executing our code. Nothing's here because, well, the app is empty. And why does it matter that index.js is empty? Okay, so if we go to the Replit file, you can see that when we actually run this app, the entry point for the app is the index.js file. So that's why nothing is happening, because this is completely empty. Now let's go to the AI and just let's configure this as a brand new web app. Now, you might not know this, but basically we want to configure this as an Express app. And that's what's going to let us run this on a server. So the first thing we want to do is configure this as an Express app. So configuring it as an Express app will make this run on a server and then be targetable via the URL, like what we had before. So I'm just going to tell the AI that I want to build a basic HTML page that I want to run on a server, which is Replit, and to configure it as an Express app. Okay, so there we are. I want to build a HTML web page that will run on a Replit server, and I need to configure this as an Express app. So let's hit run. Now, the cool thing is that we've actually got index.js as the context for this AI chat. And it's just similar to how you would use Cursor AI. Okay, so what do we have here? So first we have an index.html file, and this is the actual publicly visible HTML file that's going to be served when we run this app. Okay, next we have our index.js file. So over here, we're actually setting up the Express server. So this is what the code is here. We're going to be requiring Express and then path, and path is going to let us basically bounce out of the index.js file across to our HTML file. So when we want to serve this app, when we're going to be running it online, we need a way to get our target URL, which is going to go into the index.js, our main entry point, and then point it to our HTML page to say, hey, make this HTML page visible online. So that's what this path is doing. But we'll get into more of that later on. And then over here, we have a run command. So then we can go into our shell, which is this over here, and we can run that command, which is node index.js, this one here, and then it's going to serve the app as if it's demoing it like online. So let's just go back to here and start building this out. So I'm going to copy this and create a new file over here called index.html. And I'm going to paste the code in here. Now let's go to index.js and click copy, go to index.js and paste it in here. And now we can use node.js and go into the shell and actually just run it here. And the shell is a terminal. So if you're used to using coding tools, this is the terminal, so to speak. So we can either run the app like this, so node index.js and hit enter, or if we click run, it's the same thing. It does the same thing for us. I'm just gonna Now run this. Okay, so we have an error. I'm just gonna plug this into the AI, and now let's go back into here and hit enter. Awesome. So I was expecting this to be a little bit sooner, but unfortunately the AI doesn't always give us the correct steps in the correct order. But basically for us to serve the Express app, which is why I mentioned it in my first message, was hopefully for the AI to actually serve this, but I think it's good to leave this debugging in here. We have to initialize the Express app. So npm is a command for Node, which will install different libraries for us. And in order for us to use the Express server, we have to install the Express library. And we didn't do that yet. That's why we got the error saying, hey, you can't just say you want to use Express without having the library installed. So now we have to copy this and go into our shell and paste it into here and hit enter. And now we're going to be downloading the Express library. So now we can run this command node index.js and we'll be able to serve this app. So I'm going to go node index.js and hit enter. Awesome. And now we have a web view tab that just opened up. And this is giving us a demo of exactly what our app looks like right now. And this is that HTML page. So going back to the HTML page, we can see that we have welcome to my Express app. This is a simple HTML page served as an Express.js server. And that's exactly what we have here. Now you can take this URL, copy it, then go to another page. Let's paste it in here. And there we go. This is the actual HTML page. And just so you know, this entire thing is the HTML page. There's just a lot of space here. So step one is done. We've actually got a basic Express app served up. Now we want to start giving this a bit of functionality. We want to have one window for chatting with the assistant and at least one window for adding and removing files. So let's go ahead and ask the AI to help modify this. So what I recommend doing is using one HTML page, but then having an element in here, like a central element that is either shown or hidden depending on whichever tab is chosen. So going back to our demo app, over here, when I click chat with assistant or file manager or instructions, actually this central div, this element here, it's the exact same element, but it's got different stuff inside it that is either shown or hidden depending on whichever one of these tabs I choose. And that's why when I press this, it's super fast. It just changes instantaneously. If I was to make 3 HTML pages here, like index 1, index 2, index 3, then every time I press one of these buttons, it would have to reload the entire index HTML page. And that would just take a little bit longer and be a little bit clunkier and really not a nice experience. So what we want to do is just have a navigation bar up top that has a couple of different buttons depending on what we want the actual total functionality to be. For it to have a central element, which is going to be linked up to these buttons here. And then maybe we want a footer to have, contact this for support or, or message bar for help with this app, something like that. So I'm going to go ahead and prompt that up over here. Okay, so here is my prompt. Now it's pretty basic, but you can make this a little bit beefier if you wanted to. And it says, hey, I want to have a HTML page that has 3 elements. The first element is a navigation bar with a logo on the left-hand side and then 2 buttons, one that says chat with an assistant and then one that says file manager. I then want a second element, which is a middle div element that has contents inside it that are shown or hidden based on whichever one of these chat with assistant or file manager options is chosen. And then number 3, I want a footer element as well. Now I want the entire web page, so the HTML page, to take up the entire page, and for the middle div element to be overflow. So it has a scrollable feature where the total length of the page doesn't change depending on which option I choose. I want the experience to just be static, like the page is there, it doesn't get longer or shorter, it stays the exact same length because it looks a lot nicer. Like when I click chat with the assistant, it's just nice to have this entire window pane filled up. When I click file manager, it's also nice that this page doesn't, change length or height. And same thing with instructions. Like I just want this to be one static size. So let's see if this actually makes that happen on the first go. I know I needed to do quite a bit of prompting to make it happen on my actual web app, but this is a nice way to see how you can actually start building this app out. So let's just maximize the screen a little bit more and let's look at this code. And let's take this new HTML code and Control A this, backspace it and paste it in. Okay, so we can see we have some CSS at the start of this to help us kind of put some more aesthetics into our web page. And then we have our main element here. So we have the nav bar up top, we have the container inside, which will either show or hide content depending on which of these buttons is chosen. So let's see if this works in a sec. Then we have a footer as well. And then we have some JavaScript over here to basically run the functionality of choosing the different tab and then showing the different content of the main div. Now, best practice would be to actually create a separate folder here called public, and then put the index.html inside that public folder, as well as any CSS and JavaScript that we're okay to have shown into our front end. But for now, I think it's more important for me to show you exactly how you can start building this out and not kind of getting stuck in the weeds. So just want to put that note here. You can actually go to the AI and say, hey, let's make that separate public folder, and then make sure everything ties up. So when we're serving the page on the index.js, we actually point to the correct folder that we're going to be using, and it's already listed here. But okay, so now let's run this again and see how it looks. So over in my shell, I'm just going to end this. So I'm going to click Control-C on my keyboard, and that's going to stop that application from running. Now I did that because I changed the code while it was running, and it's not going to instantly reflect in this web view. You actually have to rerun it. So for me, it's just easier to run the app like this instead of going into the shell and writing in that command. So let's see how this looks. Okay, so now we have a nav bar up top, we have a central div, and then we have some footer content. So it looks a little bit bland, but yeah, let's see if it works. So I'm going to click Chat with Assistant. Okay, we have the Chat with Assistant content here. That's cool. Now let's click File Manager. And the File Manager content here, that's also very cool. I'm going to leave the styling stuff for now. If you guys would probably want to style it yourselves anyway, you can take this code and plug it into ChatGPT to help you out. I think it's more important for me to show you the functionality and how to get this kind of thing done. Okay, so for Chat with the Assistant, we actually want to build something out in Voiceflow that we can display here. So let's go across to Voiceflow and build that out. Okay, so I'm going to go and create a new agent. I'm going to call this test, get started. I'm going to skip this because I'm going to be using my own database. And let's go ahead and delete these workflows. We don't want any of this. Now let's go into home. Awesome. Let's delete all this. And now the first thing we want to do is actually have a welcome message for our assistant. Let's say, hi there. And another one that says, ask me a question. Then we want to capture the user's response. And over here, we'll change it from entity to the entire user reply. And now we're saving the user's response to last utterance. Next, we want to be making the function call, which we'll build out in a second, but let's go to dev, click on function. And after that, we're going to be displaying the response out of our Pinecone assistant. So we're going to be using a talk step, and let's just put here, sample response for now. And then once again, we want to capture the next response or the next question from the user. So let's change this from entity to entire reply. And then for this block, this will be the Pinecone API block, and we're going to feed this directly back into the Pinecone API so we can have a continuous conversation. So let's go to actions, go to block, and go home and find that Pinecone API. So this is a very basic flow for us to use. We'll still build this out, but I actually just want to install this into our web page and just see how this looks. Okay, so we've just deployed this version of the app, so at least when we run the Voiceflow embed, we'll get some messages like hi there and ask me a question. So now let's go ahead and embed this. So I'm going to copy this code, and back in Replit, I now want to insert this into the chat container. So into here, but I'm not going to do this myself. I'm just going to go back to the AI and ask it to do this for me. Okay, so I'm just asking the AI to insert the embed code that I just got from Voiceflow directly into the chat container, which is this container here. Let's send this. All right, and now before we actually insert that code, the one thing that we want to do is actually have the chatbot, the Voiceflow embed, take the space of the entire container here. Now, if we just insert the embed code, we're going to get that little bubble in the bottom right-hand corner that'll let us open up that chat as a little widget, which we don't want. So now I'm going to give the AI some additional code that's going to say, when you're rendering the chatbot, make sure it fills the entire element and not just as a widget. Okay, and here is what I've written. I basically asked, hey, can you edit that code so it renders like this? And I've given it the snippet that I'm going to need in order to target that container, which is this, and fill that space with the chat. So let's hit enter. All right, so we have our new code. Let's copy this and paste it into here. Let's stop this and rerun it. Okay, let's click File Manager. Let's click Chat with Assistant. Okay, so we have the actual element here, but we can see that it's not fully spaced up. There is some white space here. Let's go back to the AI and reprompt and basically say, hey, there's some white space between the bottom of the container and then the footer content. Can you just make it fully filled up? Okay, and now I'm saying, hey, there's some space between the bottom of the container div and then the top of the footer. Can you just extend the container out so it fills this space? And hopefully that does the trick. Right, let's copy this code. Let's stop this and rerun it. And now let's see how it looks. Let's go chat with assistant. All right, so it's still not actually filling the space here. So I'm not gonna try and use Replit for this. I'm gonna take a screenshot of how this looks, and I'm gonna copy the HTML code and I'm gonna paste it into Claude and ask it to help me out. All right, so I've just prompted Claude. I've given the screenshot of the image and let it know what I want it to do. So let's see if we now have a fix. Okay, it didn't give us the full code. I'm just gonna say, can you return the code in full? Okay, so I had to prompt it one more time. So after it gave me the full code, I actually put this code into Replit, but I realized that it changed the functionality around. So I had to reprompt and say, hey, maintain the core functionality, just make that main div longer. And I gave it the original HTML, the one that had the white space. And then I had the returned HTML this time, and it gave me this. So here's the actual interface. As you can see, we can press File Manager and it changes, chat with assistant and it changes. And again, it doesn't look that pretty right now, but it's getting there. But now we have the full space taken up with our actual chat assistant. Let's click start and we can have that conversation we're building out in Voiceflow. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is actually finish off Voiceflow and build out the Pinecone assistant. All right, so for that, I'm going to go across to pinecone.io. If you don't have an account already, just go to pinecone.io and create an account. Once you've created an account, even a free one, go to the assistants tab, and then over here, we'll click create an assistant. And let's call this, I'm just gonna call it test2 and click create assistant. And it's as easy as that. Now we have our Pinecone assistant and we can actually preload some documents into here just to get it working. So I'm gonna upload a document. All right, there we go. I've just uploaded a randomly generated FAQ document for my assistant. Let's ask it a question. What are the open hours? And here is our response along with a reference that if we click this reference, we then can download the actual PDF that we uploaded. Okay, so with this built, let's go across to Voiceflow. Now back on our canvas. Okay, so the next thing for us to do is build out this function. So let's go back, let's go to functions, create a new function. And I'm just gonna call this Pinecone API and create function. And now in my GitHub repo, I'm just going to copy from the second line all the way down to the second last line. Copy this, and back in Voiceflow, I'm going to backspace these lines and now paste it into here. All right, so I'm going to link a video somewhere here where I go through setting this up and kind of explaining the code in a little bit more detail. So you can watch that video if you want to see, but I'm going to quickly configure the rest of these inputs, outputs, and paths, and then get back to you. All right, so just quickly, I've listed my input variables, so conversation history, Pinecone API key, assistant name, and user message. My output variables for the assistant message, conversation history, and then for my paths, I have success and error. So now let's go back to our workflows, click on home, and let's plug that function into here. Let's go Pinecone API, and for success, we're gonna be displaying the message back here. Okay, so now we actually have to fill out these variables. All right, so let's start adding these variables to our canvas. So let's go conversation history, and we have to add this to our canvas. Then I'm gonna go Pinecone API, so Pinecone API key, add that as well. Assistant name, let's add that as well. And user message is just gonna be the last utterance from here. So last utterance. And for assistant message, this is the response we're gonna be displaying over here. So let's just call this assistant response, add that as well. And then for conversation history, it's the exact same one from before, which we already have. All right, so now the next step is to plug our assistant response into here. So let's put that as a variable, assistant response. And let's just double check. Okay, it always does this, it always removes this one. So go back and kind of fill it back in. So assistant response. Now what we have to pay attention to is we have Pinecone API key here and assistant name here, which we haven't set yet. So they're actually null values. So next step for us is to go to logic and set the variables at the start of the conversation. So let's replug this up here. All right, so the first variable we're going to be setting is Pinecone API key. We'll set that in a second. And then the second variable is going to be assistant name. Okay, awesome. Now to get these values back in Pinecone, if you just go to assistants, this is the assistant we just created, which is called test-2. Now back in Voiceflow for assistant name, let's just type that in here, test-2. And for our Pinecone API key, back in Pinecone, let's go to API keys. Now let's go ahead and create a new API key. I'm gonna call this test-2, create API key, and let's copy this API key and then paste it over here. Awesome. So this actually should be working for us now. Let's have a sample conversation. Ask me a question. What are the opening hours? Awesome. And now we have our response from the assistant. So this works. Let's go ahead and publish this again. So the Voiceflow side of things is done. If you would want, you can go into here and then open up this general tab and open up the appearance tab, and you can mess around with what kind of logos and colors you have and the initial messaging, but I'm going to leave that to you guys to do by yourselves. But this flow is actually operational as it is. So we're good to go now. So back in Replit, the next thing we want to do is actually fill out the file manager contents. So what that means is we actually have to install these API calls. So the API call is going to be upload a file to the assistant. One is going to be list files, and then one is going to be delete an uploaded file. So let's go ahead and build this out. All right, and this is the prompt we're going to be using to build out the file manager div. So we're saying, hey, for the file manager div, we want to have two buttons. So an add file and list file button like this, one button and two buttons. And we're just giving our API key and the assistant name directly into the script, which typically you'd use a .env file and save these securely, but for now we're just going to put it into the script. And then we're saying the add file button triggers the API call, which is this, and it has a sample response, which is this. And I got this from the documentation, so I clicked on upload file to assistant, and I gave the sample API call and the sample response. Now we want to give the sample response each time that we make an API call. So if there's any other next steps, the AI already knows what kind of response it gets, like how the structure is, so it can build off that and kind of pull out information if it needs to. Then for the list files button, it triggers this API call with this sample response. And now this response is important because the list files is going to give us a list of files that are attached to our assistant. And now our next step here is to get each of those file names and display them as a clickable button, so we can actually delete those files if we want. And we're saying here, if the button is clicked, we want a modal to pop up that says, do you want to delete this file? And it has the options of yes and no. So just like this, if I click list files, then I have clickable buttons, and I click one of the buttons and it has, do you want to delete the file? It has yes or no. And then if yes is clicked, it shows this API call with this sample response body. And once again, all I did to get that was go to list files, gave the API call and the sample response. Then I went to delete an uploaded file, and I gave the sample API call and the sample response. All right, so let's copy this prompt, and I'm just gonna continue using Claude for this. So let's copy the entire prompt, go back to Claude, and now paste it into here, and let's see what we get back. All right, so this is our code, but over here we've got some placeholders for previous code, and I don't want that. I actually want the entire code to be delivered back to me, like here as well. So I'm just gonna say, can you please the code in? All right, so I've just reprompted to give us the code in full. So this time when we get this script back, we can just copy and paste it directly into Replit. All right, awesome. So now let's copy this, and back in Replit, let's paste it into here. Stop the previous deployment, rerun it. So now let's go chat with assistant, make sure it's still here. Okay, that's awesome. And now for file manager. Okay, the buttons don't look too nice, but let's go add file. Okay, I'm gonna add this file. Okay, so that didn't really work, but now I have list files, which is kind of showing me some file here. If I click, do you wanna delete this file? I'm just gonna click yes. So let's see what happens here. If I refresh this, back to file manager, list files again. Okay, so now it's not showing up this time. So it's not super pretty, but the list files and the delete file seems to work, but the add files didn't really work. All right, so back in Pinecone, I'm just gonna go to the assistants and then open up my assistant from before. Let's go across the files and see what's uploaded into here. Okay, so nothing's uploaded. So the removal of the file function, like that worked fine, but the uploading a file didn't work. Okay, so I think I know why. Right now it only accepts PDFs, doesn't accept Word doc. So when I added the Word doc before, it just got rejected. Okay, awesome. So now when I add the PDF, it actually shows up here. Okay, so I came back to here and I basically said, hey, if a file is uploaded that's the wrong type, so it's not a supported file, like it's not a PDF, can you show an error for a few seconds? And then also the buttons on the actual page, they don't look that nice. Can you make them look a little bit nicer? And let's just add, please return the code in full. Okay, let's send this off and see what we get back. All right, so let's copy this, and back in Replit, let's paste it into here and then rerun. Okay, so I think it's maybe changed the wrong buttons, but let's go to file manager. Okay, that looks a little bit neater now. So add file, let's add a Word doc, see if the error comes up for us. Okay, so there's no error, but it should have actually let us know it wouldn't accept it. Let me just upload a PDF again. Okay, so the PDF was uploaded And now it just seems to display both of the files right after it's uploaded. So there might be some kind of thing going on with our functionality in the app. But let's go to Chat with Assistant and let's go back to File Manager, and it just stays here, which isn't the absolute nicest. But let's refresh this and let's make sure the List Files button actually works as well. Let's go File Manager, List Files, and they both show up. Okay, so from here, you probably spend a little bit of time neatening this up, like changing the coloring here, maybe brightening up the nav bar, introducing an actual logo, fixing the footer. And then from here, you would actually just go back into, I don't know, Claude or Replit or Cursor AI, whichever AI coding tool you use, and just try and reprompt it and say, hey, I want to introduce some error handling. So if the wrong file type is uploaded, that I want to show an error to the user saying, you can't upload Word docs, it has to be a PDF. Or over here, as you can see, we've got a bit of a bug where after we add a file, then the file is just displayed immediately. But I actually don't like that. I would prefer it to just be added and a message to be shown saying, hey, successfully added. So for example, over here, if I click List Files, but then I click back into Instructions and back into List Files, that disappears. So that's an actual functionality that you have to code up. And for Add Files here, when I click this button, as you can see, a lot of my stuff is grayed out, so I cannot actually add anything. That's other functionality that you also have to put into here that just doesn't let you choose something that's not a PDF. But over here, a PDF I can choose and upload. And again, more functionality here where there's a loading bar. So when you're actually uploading a document, it takes a while to process. So after it's uploaded, it might take 10, 20 seconds to actually process. And this is an indicator of when that file is actually available to you. So as you can see, there's a bunch of different functionality that you can introduce to make the user experience a little bit nicer. And that's exactly what you would be doing here. Like let's say we go to List Files and I just added this. So now I'm just going to click Delete. And over here we have file deleted successfully. So that's realistically what you'd be doing from this point. Now that you have the core functionality working, you know how to build this out, you would just go out and yes, improve the aesthetics to make this probably a bit more on brand, but then also improve some of these small error codes, the display messages, a loading indicator, just to make the overall experience a bit more user-friendly as well. Okay, so the final thing for us to do now would be to actually deploy this app. So let's say you've gone through here, you've fixed the aesthetics, you fixed the functionality, it's exactly where you want it to be. You've also gone into your script over here and you've removed any of the API keys and assistant names, and you've created an env file. You've probably also taken the index.html and then put it into a public file as well. Once you've done some of these best practice things, which you can ask AI and say, hey, like this is my app, how it's structured. How do I hide my secret information? How should I structure my app files and folders? Or, you know, how can I make this look a little bit nicer and improve the functionality? AI will be your best friend, giving you all these recommendations. But once you're done, the next step is to actually deploy this to the web so you can access it at any time. So what we're going to do is go on to deploy over here, and we're just going to choose the default settings. So we're going to go to set up your deployment, click approve and configure. We're not going to change anything, and we're going to click deploy. And now we're going to be building out the app and doing all the backend stuff in order for us to actually deploy this onto a server so that we can access it at any time using a URL. And this is also how we're going to be pointing our ClickUp or Zendesk or Microsoft Teams app to this specific app so we can display the HTML page in our other apps that we're using. Okay, awesome. So when everything's finished deploying, it's going to automatically change to this overview screen, and you're going to have this key information about your app. So now if we just copy this URL or click this button here, this is the live deployment of our app. So as you can see, it takes the entire window space. Chat with Assistant is live. We can start a new conversation. And then we have File Manager over here as well. So let's click that. List Files. Awesome. Now let's delete one of these files. Yes, do you want to delete? Let's refresh this, see if the deleted file disappears. Let's relist the files and just one file here. So the same functionality we had before is maintained once we deploy the app. And yeah, now you're ready. You can just share this URL with your team so they can use this app. Or you can point to this from your Zendesk app, your Microsoft Teams app, from ClickUp. You can embed this into Pages, and you'll see exactly what you see here. You'll have this assistant panel, and you'll have this file manager panel as well. Okay, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If this build is interesting to you, if you're a business owner and you want something like this for your team, but you don't really want to build it out yourself, feel free to reach out to me and hire me to do that for you. I left my contact details in the description of this video. Otherwise, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please like and subscribe.